Well, this is it, folks. This is the big one. This is where we talk about the latest, greatest, and weirdest original era upgrade the TI-99 4A ever got. Milton Bradley's MBX expansion system in all its glory? Well, kind of. See, the MBX is a bit of an odd duck. I mean, the TI-99 is a bit of a weird system to develop for itself. But as a TI-99 add-on with an architecture completely its own, the MBX kind of cranks the weirdness up to 11. And I didn't really expect I'd ever get the chance to talk about all that weirdness here in all the hands-on depth I wanted to, because a working MBX isn't particularly easy to come by these days, and neither are its games. And yet here we are, and now I have a chance to do a deep dive into everything MBX, to talk about what it meant for the TI-99 4A in 83 and 84, and for that matter, what it means for the TI-99 in its present and future. If you've never run into the MBX before and aren't sure exactly what it is, what the MBX is a game peripheral that adds new controller and audio input as well as output features to the TI-99. The most exciting of those being voice recognition, which allows for in-game use of voice commands. Like I said, this is Milton Bradley's latest and I'd argue greatest contribution to the TI-99 and its gaming library, but it was a long way from being their first. Milton Bradley wasn't just on board the TI-99 gaming bandwagon, they pretty much invented it. So let's take a look at Milton Bradley's larger legacy in the TI-99 world. And that starts in summer 1979, since when the TI-99 4, the predecessor to the TI-99 4A, debuted at Summer CES 1979, it was a set of Milton Bradley game cartridges that were its launch day game library. These so-called Game Vision carts are pretty rare today. Given the TI-99 4 itself didn't sell particularly well at the outset, so nor did its cartridges. And this does make the Game Vision carts collector's items today. But before you rush off to eBay with hundreds of dollars in hand looking for Game Vision carts, let me just say that however historically important and uncommon they may be, Milton Bradley's first crucial contributions to the TI-99 game library are not the most interesting. You see, rounding out Milton Bradley's TI-99 launch lineup are Yahtzee, Hangman, Connect 4, and Zero Zap. The first three are pretty much exactly what it says on the tin: Yahtzee, Hangman, and Connect 4. And if you were hoping for a proper arcade action game from Zero Zap, well, you won't find it there either. Zero Zap is kind of reminiscent of Pachinko, which is to say a game of pinball in which the game is non-interactive once the ball enters play. But I'll say one thing for the early Milton Bradley games for TI-99. They've got weirdly good music. I mean, just listen to Hangman convey in music the sense of irony and tragedy associated with the hangman's death. Still, on the whole, not the most auspicious start you could imagine for TI-99 gaming. That wasn't the end of Milton Bradley's contribution to the TI-99 library, though, or I wouldn't be making this video. First of all, Yahtzee, Hangman, Connect 4, and Zero Zap were all re-released by TI under TI branding later on. As well, Blackjack and Poker, which Milton Bradley had written, got a release by TI later on, though they had not released it earlier under the Game Vision label. And Milton Bradley added 3 more subsequent games beyond those to the TI-99 library even before the TI-99 4A had been launched. Those are Blasto, Hustle, and The Attack. And that fantastic music I mentioned is still on display in each of those. And these 3 games do contribute more than their predecessors do when it comes to arcade-style gaming on the TI-99, with all 3 of them being original action titles. Though as TI-99 4 compatible games, what they can do graphically is a bit more limited. Without the 9918A VDP that the TI-99 4A benefits from, there's no bitmap mode for added color and pattern detail. But there's still solid contributions to the library, and there are plenty of good non-bitmap mode games on the system. I like Hustle quite a bit in particular. It's a simple enough game, but it's pretty entertaining. So Milton Bradley had already made some really important contributions to the TI-99 library when the idea for the MBX came into view. And the reverse is true also, actually. Which is to say, TI's products made contributions to Milton Bradley's product catalog as well. In 1979, Milton Bradley wasn't just making news releasing games for the TI-99-4, it also released its Microvision handheld, and it chose to use TI's TMS 1100 processor in most of its Microvision games. So the partnership went both ways, with Milton Bradley using TI hardware and TI using Milton Bradley software. But while the Microvision is a fun little footnote in video game history, Milton Bradley never managed to carve out a place for itself in the video game market like Mattel did with its Intellivision, which is ultimately why they found themselves releasing an oddly complicated new TI-99 peripheral in 1983. Though that's not to say they didn't try to make their own video game console happen. The MBX itself is actually the leftovers from their attempt in that department, and community members have dug up images of that failed project, the Milton Bradley Gemini. Not to be confused with the unrelated Coleco Gemini, also released during this period. So why didn't that work? Well, where to start? This was just about the worst time in history to be considering a new video game console release. Sales were failing to meet expectations at Atari and Mattel, and the market was getting increasingly bearish throughout 82 and 83. So why not a home computer peripheral instead, with home computers on the rise? Well, it's essentially from that line of reasoning that we get the MBX in the end. And it's from that origin, as a game console development project, that it gets its weirdly elaborate feature set. Now, if the MBX were just a game-oriented input accessory, it'd be kind of crazily over-engineered. But what it really is the bones of a video game console redesigned to work as an input and sound device. Looking inside the box, the MBX features a 6809 CPU, 4K of RAM, and a General Instrument SP1000 speech recognition and synthesis chip. Basically, it's a capable little computer with no video subsystem and no removable storage or cartridge interface. Looking outside the box, we have a power jack for its DC adapter on the left side of the unit, and we have a power switch on the front. We have a cable connection for both the controller port and the cassette port on the TI-99, and both of those will be used for communication between the TI-99 and the MBX when using its software. Then we have two joystick ports for the proprietary MBX joystick on the front. One joystick is included with the MBX as packaged and shipped, and despite the two ports, that's really all you need. TI listed additional joysticks as an item to be sold separately in their product lists pre-release, but none of the major TI vendors who sold the MBX that I can find actually sold extra joysticks for the unit as a separate item post-cancellation and post-release, so they may not have made it into distribution at all. But a second joystick isn't needed for any of the system's best games, so the fact that you're basically never going to see an MBX with two joysticks isn't hurting it. The fact that if you're lucky enough to run into an MBX, it might also be missing one working joystick is going to be an issue, but them's the breaks with this kind of hardware. The joystick itself is a pretty elaborate improvement on TI's standard offering in this department. It's a 4-button joystick with one trigger button and 3 buttons on top for your thumb, and the stick is an analog stick which also features a rotation axis. It can rotate continuously through about 270 degrees of rotation. But I should probably emphasize that while most MBX games can use a regular joystick connected to the TI-99, only MBX games can use the MBX joystick. The MBX joystick interface is not signal compatible with the TI-99 joystick interface. This disappointed some buyers back in the day who hoped they'd be able to use their fancy new MBX joystick in other contexts. Alas, you can't. A fun bit of extra trivia on that point, Milton Bradley also used its Gemini joystick design for the Atari Pro Line Space Age joystick it developed for Atari, while the MBX joystick is a minor redesign and was modified to suit the new beige TI color scheme later in development. But getting back to that final beige MBX build, we also have a microphone port on the front of the unit. This will, of course, connect to the MBX headset. Now, the headset looks like a headphone and microphone combo, but it isn't actually. There's nothing inside those ear pads. They're really just a headband for the microphone boom. And that microphone is, of course, can be used for in-game voice recognition in supported games, which is definitely the most impressive feature of the MBX, and so, understandably, the one they most wanted to ensure was always present. Most games support a voice training process for the purpose of setting up voice commands in-game, and in some cases, they are actually handy, while in other cases, they're just a gimmick that I suppose they wanted to make sure was there. Anyway, the upshot of the headset port being just a microphone port for voice control is that the unit has no audio output jack. It outputs all MBX audio through an integral speaker instead. So while MBX games still output PSG sound through the TI-99, as they would normally, MBX voice synth comes out of the MBX speaker alone, separately. Just to clarify regarding the MBX voice synth, the MBX has its own voice synth chip and voice synth capabilities, and MBX games use those preferentially when it's attached. All MBX games which can run without the MBX will use the TI voice synth module we're used to if it's available and the MBX is not. But since it's a different chip from a different manufacturer using a slightly different LPC encoding scheme, TI and MBX synth don't sound identical, and you might prefer one over the other. But the biggest practical difference for me is just that all the MBX synth is coming out of the unit's integral speaker. And a resulting quirk of that is there's no volume control at all for the purpose of that sound, which I guess can be seen as a further side effect of the console heritage of the unit. You don't need an independent volume control on a console connected to a TV, but an accessory like this, on its own, with its own integral sound output, kind of needs a volume control. But I guess it didn't get that design fix. The final feature of the MBX used by all its games is its membrane keypad, which covers the top of the unit. This has a top row of labeled key functions that are standard across all the games, but all games that use the keypad during gameplay come with overlays that slip under the lip of the keypad surface to provide a graphically appealing input panel. One thing the MBX does that I find really enhances the usability of the keypad is it makes a little click sound during use when you tap a key, and that's really helpful, especially given some of the graphical overlays may obscure the exact shape and size of the keys. So getting that little confirmation that yes, you actually tapped a key, I find that really helps, and good move. So you can see the championship baseball overlay here makes it so you're pressing on first base on the overlay to throw to first base, or pressing on left field to play a ball in left field, or what have you, which is more appealing than just tapping keys marked first base and left field, I figure, and so I consider that nice. Milton Bradley didn't invent the idea of overlays for membrane keypads or using them in a baseball game. Mattel and the Intellivision had already been there and done that. But as a player, all that matters is that it works well, not who thought of it first, and the MBX design works well. So that's what the MBX is, where hardware and design are concerned, and why it is the way it is. But let's talk about the history of its arrival on the TI-99 scene and what gameplay experiences it brought with it to the TI-99 library. That story begins for the MBX at Winter CES 1983 when TI and Milton Bradley demonstrated what was at that point called the Milton Bradley Expander. The unit's black, red, and aluminum color scheme is still at this point consistent with the styling of the Gemini and the original black and aluminum TI. And you can see it's also got a plastic grill on the keypad instead of just making it a flat surface which a laminated overlay lies on. This is a leftover from the design of the Gemini 2, which featured that plastic grill on the keypad. And as I say, the branding at this point labels it the Milton Bradley Expander. It only becomes the MBX much closer to release. The CES demonstration made a pretty big splash in the tech community. Voice recognition as a gameplay feature was a shiny new tech toy, and Milton Bradley was demonstrating it in fully realized video game use on an affordable consumer device for an affordable home computer. The New York Times reported, "The Milton Bradley Company has come up with a set of video game cartridges that do more than flash pretty pictures and make sounds. They listen, too. Voice command cartridges, which will go on sale later this summer, let a player direct the action with spoken directions." And in the TI community, 99er Magazine and the International User Group newsletter have their reports on the CES demonstration in February. And there we get word of all the titles that'll be coming to the system. Titles being Championship Baseball, Bigfoot, Sewer Mania, Honey Hunt, Soundtrack Trolley, Bug Hunt, Superfly, Meteor Belt, Space Bandit, and Terry's Turtle Adventure. All of which did ultimately release, so we have them today. And with only minor name changes along the way, with Bug Hunt releasing as I'm Hiding and Space Bandit releasing as Space Bandits instead in the plural. Other games were planned and worked on during this period but never released. One of those unreleased titles survives, Starship Pegasus. The others do not. Starship Pegasus being also the name of game for TI-99 4A by Not Polyoptics incidentally, but not the same thing and not related. Anyway, as for those announced titles, 99er concluded their rundown with the observation, of these 10, we felt that Championship Baseball and Bigfoot had the potential to become real video game hits. Well, due to what happened during the rest of '83 to the TI-99, to the video game industry as a whole, and to the MBX, none of those were going to become real video game hits, but they were going to be released and enjoyed eventually. And Bigfoot and Championship Baseball were definitely the most widely enjoyed in the long run, so they picked the right winners out of the starting gate for sure. But if they were going to be enjoyed, they were going to need to get into the hands of TI-99 users somehow, and that was made a little trickier when 2 weeks before the planned November release of the MBX as the ultimate TI-99 gaming add-on, TI discontinued the computer platform itself. The upshot being that Milton Bradley fairly quickly announced that they didn't intend to produce the MBX, and it and its games would not be released. It wasn't just TI's withdrawal from the market that did in the MBX, though. The MBX as a Milton Bradley product line had been killed just as much by Atari's withdrawal from a deal that would have seen it produced as a peripheral for Atari products as well. As product launches go, it was a disaster for Milton Bradley on all fronts. But happily, the reality was a little less dire than Milton Bradley's cancellation announcement suggested. And in April '84, an understandably bewildered Sally Lane of the Upstate User Group was able to tell its newsletter readers, after rumors that the Milton Bradley MBX system would be out before Christmas, and then rumors that it would not be out at all, it is now out. Fall '83 crushed plenty of hopes and dreams in the video game sector, and the MBX was one of them. And the MBX and its games did make it into the hands of vendors and 99ers in the long run. So not all dreams were crushed. The Milwaukee User Group featured a demo of the MBX at their April '84 meeting. The Puget Sound 99ers had a demo at their April meeting as well. And the Ohio User Group promised a demo at their May meeting. And plus, the MBX units continued to be available from key TI-99 vendors for the next 2 years. Enthusiast 99 featured a store display by Computer Corner in Detroit in June '84 with the MBX as a visible centerpiece. Arcade Hardware in the UK featured it in its ads through '84 and '85. In August '84, Unisource advertises that it has 200 in stock. And Unisource and Triton catalogs feature it through '84, '85, and '86. But part of the reason for the continued availability is likely just to have been low demand. At the end of the day, it was a moderately expensive, bulky, and complicated upgrade that is only fundamentally required by one good game, Championship Baseball. So, a little stock probably went a long way. The other 2 games that require it to run, Terry's Turtle Adventure and I'm Hiding, are children's education titles. And while Bigfoot and Superfly, for example, are good games worth playing that include MBX features, they don't actually require the MBX, and only Superfly really benefits from it. And this confusion about how required the unit is another issue I think it faced. Ads and blurbs seem to be wrong as often as not about whether the MBX is required by any given piece of MBX software. And that's kind of unavoidable, I figure, given that the unit has a collection of unrelated functions with different features being used and being either required or optional to differing extents in different games. As affordable and available as it was for a while there, today the MBX is relatively rare. So getting your hands on one is unlikely. But hopefully someday it can be emulated so everyone in the TI-99 community can experience it and see what it does well. That'd be a little tricky because it is a complicated input device. You need to emulate not just the architecture, but its 64-key keypad, 3-axis 4-button joystick, and microphone input, which is maybe too much to ask for a system with such a small library. But we're always making new software for the TI-99 in the TI-99 community, so why should it have to be the case that the MBX release titles are all the software it ever sees? Maybe all the MBX needs is a little new software to make it quite literally sing. And there is good news on that front, as Barry Boone did develop a set of routines for interacting with the MBX from Extended Basic, which still circulate in the community. So I might have to give them a try. For now, though, I'll settle for recording the MBX games we got in '84 in action, and bringing you folks some MBX reviews and gameplay. I'm looking forward to it. The world needs to experience the brilliance of championship baseball, at least, as it genuinely is a really great game. In closing, I'd like to thank the members of the TI-99 community who've archived the newsletters and collected community information over the years that makes this research and recollection of history possible today. In particular, Bill Gaskell and Brian Ropolo. And I'd also like to thank Lee Stewart, who provided me with several hard-to-find MBX carts for the purpose of this project. Anyway, did you own an MBX or use one back in the day? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your stories. If you enjoyed this rundown of the MBX and its place in TI-99 history, and you'd like to see more in the future, hit subscribe below. As always, have fun and party like it's TI-99.